Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about movements and initiatives that seek to move humanity to its next epochal iteration. This podcast is brought to you by Witlingo. When it comes to managing a community, one of the keys to success is the ability to effectively communicate with the members of that community. If you are a service coordinator or responsible for community engagement, Witlingo provides a multi-channel, multilingual notification and engagement platform to help you work more efficiently and effectively. For more information, please visit www.witlingo.com. That's www.witlingo.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid.
Melina Tsapos, welcome
Yes.
to Humanity 8.0.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
You
Excited.
bet. Thank you for making the time. As we were chatting before we started recording, you and I have a lot in common in terms of our interests. You're very interested in epistemology, obviously, in understanding how people come to know and to believe things. And I think we are right now, I believe, in a period of our time where that question is probably most poignant, right? There's a lot of interest about what is true and what is not true. You have to have fact checkers and all that. We are in the post-truth era. And so I'm doing a series on just focusing on conspiracy theories that I think that help us unpack a lot of what's happening. So you're a third one. I'm hoping to do two more, and then hopefully we can put all those into a nice book, and I'll keep you posted on that. But let's start with you. Okay, currently you are doing a PhD, right? In philosophy.
Yeah.
So, and you're doing it on conspiracy theories. You're doing it at Lund University in Sweden, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's great.
Okay.
Small.
I guess my question to you is this: why did you pick conspiracy theories as your topic?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why did I choose conspiracy theories? I think the short answer maybe is that the way I saw it was, well, I think that conspiracy theories, the way I think about them, are that they're actually essential to a well-functioning democracy. They're necessary. We have to investigate them to be able to have well-functioning democracy, right? Transparency and so on, all these values that we value. But then I saw a certain narrative in the media and, picked up by politicians as well, that kind of makes them synonymous to disinformation or something that is by definition false and shouldn't be, touched or just be dismissed, actually. They're a pejorative kind of. And for me, that was kind of worrying and also kind of interesting. Like, because for me, conspiracy theories are more interesting because we don't really know which are true and which are not. So that's precisely the interest here. But I also felt like the phenomena became so entangled that, as a philosopher, or, this is something that we're really good at, trying to make precise definitions, trying to think clear about certain topics or areas of life. And so I felt like this would actually be a really interesting PhD project for me. Yeah, because also it's very personal, because it was happening all around me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that the imprecision or the fuzziness, right, of the of this whole thing makes it an interesting problem for folks who are all about pinning things down.
Yeah.
What is,
exactly. Yeah.
So that's an interesting at the middle. That's very interesting. And so I yesterday I was reading an article that you just published in Inquiry. Really nice article. I think I'm going to have a link to it, because I think anybody who wants to know where we are right now, where's the thinking, I think that article really brings all the main issues and also all the main people who are discussing this seriously. So in there, so you present a really nice overview, and it's not a superficial overview; it's a real good one, in my opinion. Then you introduce some interesting concepts. So I'm going to just hit you with these concepts and give it, if you can give a definition to the audience, that'd be great. So first of all, I discovered that there's something called the field of conspiracy theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Right.
Yeah.
So is that the discipline of investigating conspiracy? What does that mean?
No, I think so. Actually, I didn't coin that term. I think it might have been M. Dendeth who was the first one to actually coin it, but it's catched on, and it's basically just the academic research on conspiracy theory. So, because what we see is that there's so many different fields now that are interested in it. It's not just philosophers, it's not just psychologists, political scientists. So there's this whole area where we kind of all we're interested in something we call conspiracy theories, but then the question is, are we really talking about the same thing, and so on. But so basically the theory about conspiracy theories as it relates to academic research. Yeah.
Okay. And then you mentioned in the introduction that what I read about you, that you're really interested in two things at a very high level. The cognitive architecture, right, of
Yeah.
beliefs, and right. And then you also seem to be interested in the empirical research, and tell me if I'm getting this right. The empirical, you are studying how people are doing empirical research about conspiracy theories, right? Is that true? Is it accurate what I just said, the second one? Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say so.
Can you very briefly explain the first one, which is cognitive? What does it mean? What does a cognitive architecture mean?
It's basically why and how we think the way we do. Like, how does the brain work? And not just under, well, it's related, of course, to the neuronal level, but if you know a little bit about the field of cognitive science, so I also have a background in cognitive science, and that's basically trying to tie together everything from the fundamental levels of how the brain works, but also our cognition. So the psychological aspect, how we form our beliefs, our biases, and things like that. So it's trying to tie those, it's very ambitious, but it's trying to tie that into one kind of story that we can understand how we work, basically, how we form concepts and so on.
And then how about the second one? Like, how does one go about doing empirical research, and you're interested in them in that sense?
Yeah. So I think this is actually a really nice way where philosophers can work, because what we see with psychologists, for example, that they do a lot of work, right? A lot of empirical work. They do survey studies, and for us that are a bit slower and a bit more questioning, trying to nitpick a bit more, we can actually look at, but what are their results actually showing? And so one thing for me that, well, I've written a paper, but it's still under review. But what I'm saying there is that it matters what kind of question, like what kind of conspiracy theories that the researcher determines as conspiracy theories, and what kind of reply you get to those, and then you try to correlate them with certain socioeconomic factors, and that becomes problematic if you're not transparent with that you've only looked at these certain kinds of conspiracy theories that might be of a certain type. For example, I'll give you an example. Some of them are typically not the official narrative of the place where they do this research, the survey study. And so when you get people that are, for example, against the official narrative, I don't think it's so strange that they are maybe higher on the narcissistic scale. Because it is, it's not so strange, because it's people that have to go against what most people say in their society. But we have to be clear with that. So that's what I'm also, I think it's important to be careful and clear what we're actually studying.
Okay, so you look into who is doing the studying, what did they pick, right? And why and how they're doing it, maybe how they're interpreting the answers, right? So that's okay, I got it. Okay.
That's one way.
Okay. So here's the next one. So there it seems that there are two camps, right? There's the generalists, right? And there's the particularists.
Yeah.
What do those two terms mean in this context? Generalist and
yeah. So I think the most dominant view in philosophy, or established, is the particularist view. Just that we think that conspiracy theories is not something we can generalize say that they are, as a class, something bad, or mad, bad, and dangerous, as some would say. But rather, we need to look at the individual conspiracy theory and then determine its truth or falsehood. But for example, the generalists, they're arguing, no, there is such a thing, that we can generalize conspiracy theories to be, you know, morally wrong or to believe or such.
Okay.
So yeah, there's this distinction because what we see, for example, that's what I meant also with the empirical research. So what we see is that we start off with a so-called neutral definition of what a conspiracy theory is, but the conclusions later on become this kind of generalization. We assume that conspiracy theories are something that are by definition false, or by you know, against the official narrative, or some kind of thing. But rather than being honest that we're narrowing down which conspiracy theories we're looking at, we just say that conspiracy theories are defined as this general thing that makes them such.
I understand. And that's why I was sort of like didn't fully get it, because it felt to me that generalists are either guilty of a tautology, right, or are easily falsifiable. We can falsify them. We can say, okay, here's what you call a conspiracy theory that was called a conspiracy at some point, but is no longer called a conspiracy theory. And wouldn't it have been nice, Mr. Generalist, if you had gone and studied at the time and understood and so forth? So is generalist position tenable, to be honest with you, or is it just, you know, a foil?
As I've seen it, like, I'm open, right, to whatever it is, but I mean, so far I haven't seen any good generalist theory that can actually, I think, be productive and theoretically fruitful.
Yeah.
And not just become another political statement, you know. I think that's a danger with the generalist position.
Yeah. I think at the end of your paper, Keith Harris sort of plays that role, right? Journalist in a way, right? Maybe I should invite him and see if I can get him to explain himself.
Yeah. I would definitely say he's one of the better ones. You know, he's very intelligent and very he's been thinking a lot about this. So
and he positions himself as a generalist.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see what the. Okay, the next one is, and then after this, we will move on from defining things to a conversation. Okay, the next
All
one is first order versus second order conspiracy theories. What does it mean that something is a first order conspiracy theory and another one second order?
Is that from my paper? The
Yeah.
were about the.
Yeah.
Oh, you have to remind me, because I think there I'm actually. Am I citing Alexios? Because I think I might be using his terminology there, but I
think the way you wrote about it is, and tell me if this I'm interpreting correctly. So a first order would be explaining, you know, let's call it conspiracy, explaining a phenomenon that is not mainstream, right? Like I don't know, JFK assassination or whatever it may be, right? So that's first order, right? Second order, from my understanding, is sort of an example would be, you know, the Russians are evil, okay? And that's conspiracy theory at the high level, which explains a lot of first order conspiracy theories. Or, you know, the Americans, and that's another question I want to ask you. You know, America it's called a force for good, okay? It promotes democracy, right? And it loves peace, right? And so that's that's the superstructure. That's the second order. I would call it a conspiracy theory myself, right? That informs everything else, so that it's very hard to deviate. So as soon as you start formulating a conspiracy, sort of a first order conspiracy theory that deviates, that challenges first one, you know, you're really getting into what is called a conspiracy theory by the establishment. People who believe the first order conspiracy theory. Am I understanding it correctly? Meaning there is a superstructure of a paradigm of how to see the world, right? And that sort of informs what is and what is not a conspiracy theory.
I don't think, well, I think, to be honest with you, I don't remember how I write about it in my paper, but I know who actually coined those terms. I think and I should double check this, but so don't take my word for it, but I think what he says that, you know, you have a conspiracy theory, which is a theory about a conspiracy, but then you can have a conspiracy theory about the conspiracy theory. And that would be, for example, I think exactly the example that he uses is the Zionists, the elders of, what were they called? Yeah, they had this...
Pillars of Zion.
Yeah, exactly. And so when, for example, the Nazis formed a conspiracy theory about that, so that became a second order conspiracy theory because it's a conspiracy theory about a conspiracy theory.
Okay.
I think that's how he means that. But I think what you're talking about, like this world, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when you have this worldview, that's what makes you a conspiracy theorist, when you see everything through this kind of conspiracy filter, or that there is some kind of elite that controls the world. Is that kind of more what you were thinking about?
Yeah, well, let me ask you this, because I think it ties into it. My understanding is when somebody says that X is a conspiracy theory, they are assigning something nefarious to the enterprise, right? And my question too is, I'm assuming that that is sort of part of the definition, right? Can one have, for example, can one have a conspiracy theory about a group of people doing something good?
It depends on who you ask, right? I think there are some philosophers, some particularists that would say that you could. For example, a surprise birthday party, like that's the, you know, staple example, where there is a group of people that are conspiring to make me happy, to surprise me with a birthday party. So that would still be by definition, it could be still a conspiracy, because conspiracy just means having a secret together, a secret plan together. And so that's what this group of people are doing. They're conspiring to make a birthday party for me.
Okay,
so
interesting.
if I believe that they're doing that, then that's a positive conspiracy theory. But I've actually, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think there is some level where we actually have to think about it the way people think, like the way people think about it and talk about it, for it to actually make more sense. And instead of saying that there has to be something nefarious or malicious about the people that are conspiring, I think it's enough to just say that it has to be against somebody's interest. So maybe the elites are not evil, but what they're doing when they're conspiring is against my interest. And that makes it something that's bad for me, you know, but I don't have to necessarily define if their plan is evil.
My next question is the following. Does a conspiracy have to be called a conspiracy only when the folks involved in it are consciously and actively and discursively conspiring, as opposed to effectively conspiring? Here's what I mean by that. For example, journalists, they say, well, my editor never tells me to do anything. I do as I please, and I've never heard them say change this or that because it makes our country look this way or that way. Okay? So as far as they are concerned, there's no conspiracy theory, there's no conspiracy. And anybody who says that the media is tied to the establishment is just wrong, right? But in effect, right, there is a conspiracy in the following sense. In the sense that if you are a journalist, right, and you want to have a livelihood, you have a family to feed, you know, very quickly you pick up the signals about what is the red line, okay? Where, you know, how far can you go, and what to say and what not to say, right? And how to say it, right? And so you have in effect a conspiracy, right? That's quite a silent one, right? So does a conspiracy have to be enunciated? Because if it has to be enunciated, then I think no conspiracy really exists like that. Nobody, you don't have a cabal of people coming together, but there are interests, and there are winks, and there are, you know, constraints that make you behave in a certain way. So that's a systemic, I would say, a systemic conspiracy, but not. So do conspiracy theories, to qualify as a conspiracy, do they have to have people who are conversing amongst themselves?
I think you're touching on a few really interesting points there, because I think I don't agree with you that these kind of real explicit conspiracies don't exist, because I think they do exist. For example, when, you know, a government is planning to wage a war, or when there's false flag operations, I think they do really sit in a room and plan these things, you know, that might be illegal or such. But you're also hitting on something very interesting, that how is somebody actually involved in this conspiracy? Do they have to explicitly sit in that room to be able to, you know, make this conspiracy real? Or an example, like your example with the journalists, or, you know, just somebody doing their job, that's a good example. But another one could be Edward Snowden, right? When he was working for the NSA, everybody working there were sort of, you know, this PRISM affair. Maybe they weren't aware that this was, you know, exactly a conspiracy, you know, an intention to do this, but they were still working on it every day, you know, but they weren't on the conspiracy, even though they were making it possible to happen. So where you draw this line on who is involved in the conspiracy, is very interesting when it comes to exposing conspiracy theories, because some people would say where this becomes really important is when people say that, oh, there's no way, you know, 400,000 people working at NASA would keep this a secret, you know, but there's maybe nothing to keep secret, because they're not, you know, they don't see it as a part of a conspiracy. Like you said, they have, you know, families to feed. They're just doing their job. But I also still think that there is still also these other types of conspiracies where it's explicit.
Oh no, I think I agree 100% with you. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. In fact, I think they are. I think most of the time there is a group of people who are controlling, right? And then, but to have that happen, right? They have, you know, they cannot just go and tell everybody. They have to create an architecture, right? For example, journalists. Again, I go back to journalists because they are so, you know, such a vehicle for the government. If you want to have access, you know, to me, right? Here's the story I'm feeding you, you know, and here's the worldview that you need to adopt. If you want to keep that access, meaning you're gonna keep being able to say sources said, write stories in New York Times. You know, sources said X, sources said Y. You know, why did sources say that and not something else? What are they keeping? Why they are releasing this information now, not later? Why only this information? So there is sort of this manipulation. I agree with you. There are people who sit down, and there are people who, not necessarily to do something evil, but to pursue a policy, whatever it may be.
That's right.
Which
Their own interests sometimes, you know.
Yeah, their own interests, right? And I do think that there are, totally 100% with you, that there are actual, they sit down and they architect, you know, for example, you know, the Iraq invasion, right, between the US and the UK. You know, what were those called? I have it here. The papers that came, the memo something.
Oh, not the Contra-Iran affair thing. No, I'm not sure which one.
You know, I have it here. Downing Street memo or something like that.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was revealed in WikiLeaks, right? WikiLeaks, you know, that it was actual full on conspiracy of how to fix the evidence to justify, as opposed to the other way around. The dog was, you know, the tail was wagging the dog. So to show they had decided to go and do a regime change, right? And so they said, okay, how do we go around? So that came out, and it was clear it was an absolute conspiracy. In that case, there was a conspiracy, but then you saw how the media was selling that without being completely in the know about what's happening there, right?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting what you're saying. Like Charles Pigden, I think, is one of those who would say, you know, it's enough that you know some history and the history of politics, especially to, I mean, you'd have to be incredibly naive to think that it hasn't happened throughout history. But also another thing, I mean, journalists do have a very important role in society because they are, you know, they are kind of the ones that we trust to do the investigation. And in that, they also have this responsibility on what is reported and what's not. So what is highlighted for us. And I follow quite a bit of the US news, the media in the US. And exactly what you're saying, you see this sometimes. I mean, you have the big channels, Fox News and CNN, and it's so clear that they're biased towards whichever party they want, whichever candidate they want to have access to and promote their policies. So it's quite dangerous when that becomes, I think, some would say we can't even ask for objectivity from journalists, but we see also the problems when they are too biased. People don't trust them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I myself, I don't see the mission of the journalist, in the US or anywhere else as being to be objective or unbiased. I see their role as very, very clear to me what their role is. Their role is to challenge power, to expose power. That's it. Not very complicated, right? And US media doesn't do that. They propagate, the narrative of the powerful, right? They are, they worship power. That's what they do, right? They want to have access. They want to sell newspapers. And so they want to sell a narrative that is soothing to the mind. The United States is a force for good. Okay, let's take a deep breath. Isn't that nice, right? From there, everything is explained according to that, right? Does the US want to, for example, continue the war in Ukraine for the sake of nothing for other than its own internal, the war machine and all that? No, cannot be true, because the United States is a force for good, right? But it's not a force for good, and the evidence is overwhelming that it's not. Clearly, it has been behind destabilization. The US is, and that's another question I want to ask you, which is the following, right? There's this myth that the United States loves democracy and wants to have democracy all over the world, right? And the evidence is overwhelming, for, I don't know, 60, 70 years that the United States has been behind many, many coups, right? That all true democracies, right? People that came from the below, right? In the name of anti-communism, when in fact it was in the name of anti-democracy, because democracy means less control. You can't control, a country's resources, by having the people vote for your intervention, or having you. Anyway, so the point really is, my question to you is this: the evidence is overwhelming. It has been overwhelming, and also the Snowden, Snowden revelations, the WikiLeaks. It's just overwhelming that there is evidence that should destroy this narrative once and for all. The narrative of the United States is a force for good, and yet, this resilience, this resilience of this narrative, and as a byproduct of that, anything that challenges that is considered conspiracy theory, right? I mean, why is the resilience? Why is such a resilience, right? I mean, the facts are here. I don't see a lot of journalists digging into WikiLeaks, the WikiLeaks documents. They don't write stories. There's so much to write there, but all of that to be written has to go against the narrative. And that's dangerous for any given journalist to dig into for their career. So the question is the resilience. How come?
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to say that, for example, with the journalist example, we know that has been, their job. With Bernstein and Woodward, right, during the Nixon era. That's exactly what they did. They pursued a conspiracy theory, as it was labeled even then. It was called a conspiracy theory, and they still pursued that. And they actually uncovered something that led to the president's, Nixon's, that he left office. A really important journalistic work. So just like you said, one of their main jobs is to question and to make sure that, they find corruption or conspiracy. So in that means that they, they are conspiracy theorists, pursue conspiracy theories. So that's an important role that they have in democracy and democratic society. But then you started talking about why there is this resilience, or you asked why there is this resilience. I think there's two stories to that. So one is nationalism is, of course, very important for a country. So there will always be propaganda for a country to be able to remain a country. I don't know if you read like Rousseau and how that whole thing started in the French Revolution. They started to unite a people, to make them feel, to be able to send them to war for you.
Yeah.
You have to unite them around one language. You know, in Europe, there was many small languages, you know, small groups, but they had to unite them around one language, around one flag, one national anthem. And that's an incredibly powerful thing that the nations around the world have succeeded with, to be able to be a nation. And I think the United States, you know, are very strong on this patriotism and nationalism to be
Yeah.
able to remain a country. And maybe this ties to it as well, but this resilience to want to know, because then if a conspiracy theory is about your enemy, then, you know, that's how you want to use it, because you want to protect your own group. And if you feel like, you know, you want to trust the institutions in the US or whichever country you're in, or that you know, feel more safe in the country that you believe in, the institution, the authorities that you believe in, then it becomes your interest to try to make the other people seem untrustworthy, you know, that we're not, we have to doubt them, they're conspiring. And then you put in some extra values in that, for example, that their conspiracy is nefarious, for example. It will be an easy way for you to make the other group seem like the outside, like the outside group, you know, and our group is the good one. It's a tool for that, I guess.
Right, exactly. And I would say that, you know, the cudgel of conspiracy theory, right, is a very powerful, you know, tool to just stop the conversation, right? Say, oh, it's dismissive, it's a conspiracy theory, move on. Right?
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so important to not use it in that sense. You know, I don't think it's good for us to use it in that sense where it's just a political statement, where you're just saying that, oh, I just call my political opponent a conspiracy theorist.
Yep.
I think it loses all its meaning, and it's actually very dangerous for us to do that. But we also have to remember, like, I think about conspiracy theories as a two-edged sword. On the one hand, like we said, you know, it would be very naive to think that conspiracies don't exist. So we need journalists and not just journalists, whistleblowers, people to just, you know, criticize and suspect conspiracy, because we don't want to have it in our democratic societies. But on the other hand, if you distrust your government and you distrust all the institutions to an excessive degree, you can't have a society, right? Like, there is a level of trust, and conspiracy theories, you know, you typically attack that trust in that institution. So there is a balance there. It's a two-edged sword, you know.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.